friends from the West Coast. So my name is James Gutierrez. I'm the CEO of a company called Inseeked. We started about a year and a half ago, and we have our background in using a lot of data for creating, innovative risk models, and we're trying to apply that more broadly to the consumer sector, working with also some peer-to-peer lenders as well as other opportunities for origination. So just high-level background, since this is about alternative credit, I just wanted to touch on, why now? Why is this so important now? What's changed? Now I think it's kind of sexy to be in alternative credit. Maybe 8 years ago it was a little bit different. So very high level, there's all these new regulations that have come into the market for banks. Just to mention four, Dodd-Frank, the Basel II, Basel III, and the Credit Card Act. So the Credit Card Act by itself, before about 50% of households in America were part of the addressable market for credit card lending. And after the Credit Card Act, it's more around 17%. So there's a huge portion that's been sucked out. And then, of course, there was the 50% that didn't have access before. So the market is just now even bigger. And with all the new regulations, it means that the banks are pretty crippled. So there needs to be more innovation. There needs to be more data. There needs to be, and there's a lot of people jumping in to try and figure this out. So, revolving credit availability has dropped on an outstanding basis by over $300 billion, on an available basis by over $900 billion. I don't know if Noah covered this, but small business lending has dropped significantly from banks as well. So you're seeing it not just in consumer, but also small business. An area that we like at Inseeked and we try and focus on, given our backgrounds, is really the non-prime segment. So if you look at this, basically, from 2009 to more recently, there's been a reduction of about $120 billion of credit card availability to the subprime, non-prime market. So it's pretty significant, and those people really don't have any other options except maybe a very high-priced payday loan online or in a branch. So technology is really changing lending fundamentally, and we found this. We're doing this at Inseeked, and we found this certainly before in the last company. And so starting with the different value chains. On the application side, that's kind of obvious. You can apply online. There's faster. There's more automated process. That's really important to a lender because the faster you can get somebody through your process and the more people you can convert, the lower cost of acquisition you have, and that really affects also how many people you can lend to. Because if I can acquire a customer at a lower cost, I might be willing to take more risk on that marginal decision because basically the NPV calculation of that customer is better off if I can acquire them at a lower cost. So that's pretty important. On the underwriting side, big data, obviously there's more data sources that we have access to. There's more data sources that can be API'd in. And so it allows you, of course, to use that in creating better segmentation. The jury's still out on kind of some data sources that you can use, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But underwriting is clearly a big area for data. Or for technology. The third area that actually a lot of people don't speak about, but there's been a major shift to just online or to electronic payments. So the fact that you can get ACH payments from people lowers the cost of servicing significantly, improves the likelihood of getting your money back, and just makes it also easier to reconcile. So if you're trying to securitize loans or you're trying to get lenders to fund your portfolio, if you've got more of your payments coming into one lockbox, one centralized location, it's all electronic, it's a lot easier for you to create transparency, to get capital flowing around those loans. And then finally, what we found is mobile is also making a big difference. So my last company, we dealt with a lot of lower income borrowers who primarily didn't have a computer at home, but had a mobile device. And so we used SMS very often for collections. So, instead of calling somebody at 1 day late, we would just send them SMSs, and it would lower the cost of it, yet still have a lot of effectiveness in terms of reaching people. So overall, technology is kind of, changing each one of these parts of the value chain and just making for more profitable lending. And I think what you're saying is banks are reeling from like all this regulatory changes, but at the same time with technology, they're just not able to keep up. And you're seeing the face of the new lenders of tomorrow are more technology companies and less banks, and that's going to continue. So as a result, you have all these non-bank alternative lenders. I think I got everybody, mostly everybody on there, at least hopefully people in the crowd. And so you're seeing a lot of that. So across all consumer, from like rent to own to business lending, merchant cash advance, you name it, there's like people competing and now new startups coming into the market here. So where did it all start for me? Alternative credit, I just want to take you back to 2005 before it was sexy and hot to be in alternative credit and what that actually looked like. So I was actually just graduating from business school at Stanford. I grew up in a Hispanic neighborhood in Southern California, and I wanted to really make an impact in the community. So I saw microfinance take off internationally, and I thought, hey, it would be really cool to try and bring that to the US. So for me, it all started in a supermarket. That was actually the first booth of my prior company called Progreso Financiero. Doesn't look like much. The laptop was about as much technology we had back then. And then this guy down here is our first customer. So you can see we had a real trusted relationship with our borrowers. That's how we got our start. So, the challenge we had back then is we wanted to help Maria, and we wanted to help her by making her a loan. So she was hardworking, immigrant culture, wanted the American dream, but didn't have traditional data. So she didn't have a FICO score. And if you don't have FICO, it's not only that you get declined from the bank, but worse, you don't really have a face. So like in this country, so no FICO, really no identity. And so for someone like Maria, it was very hard for her to kind of, build financial empowerment in this country, and very hard for traditional lenders who are really FICO and credit bureau based to figure out how am I going to make an unsecured loan to Maria. So that was our challenge, and kind of some lessons learned about how we figured that out. So there's really 3 segments we were seeing. There's a segment called the no-file segment, which is folks who don't have any credit history at all. So you ping the bureau, and it comes back as what we would call a ghost. The thin file, or someone who has a few trade lines, but so in other words, no trade lines, they might have some inquiries. So maybe they tried at a jewelry store to get credit, and that's all that shows up. So it's a very thin file, many times delivers a no score, but you still have some data more than someone who's completely non-existent in the bureau. And then a thick file was our third kind of segment of customers, someone who actually had a lot of credit, very bad, and average FICO of 540. So, at Progreso, we had to be, by necessity, experts in using alternative data underwrite, because if you hit the bureau, these guys did not have any history whatsoever. And so, starting with some lessons learned, the first lesson was what I call the eHarmony approach. So when we started Progreso, I was like right out of school, I didn't know what data variables were going to be predictive of risk. So I just started asking our customers everything. So we had this, what we call like an eHarmony-like application for a $1,000 loan. So it took 30 minutes, and I would ask them like how many dependents they had, where they were from, what was the names of their kids, anything I could get about them to try and like just build this huge database of information and try and one day hopefully hire a bunch of data scientists to kind of put it all together for us. So I think starting with a robust application was a big lesson learned. Obviously, and then later as we grew the company, we found that application data was very valuable. So if you can merge application data with more traditional credit bureau data, that data by itself could really help you segment much better. And so, that was one thing that we did. It was a good lesson learned. The second was, there's a lot of talk right now in this sort of alternative credit world around big, data scientists and how, I've got 10 that have PhDs, and you have 100 that have 2 PhDs each, and like who has more PhDs? And I think, it's really, what we learned there was like, that sounds great, but actually what you need to do is just book some bad loans. Because you learn a lot from the loan, you just make some loans, and then as you make some bad loans, you learn a lot. So again, most valuable data was once you actually had real performance data and you had real loans and you had real losses and they were seasoned. So you need to book loans today and then watch how they perform over the next 15 months or so, depending on what your average terms are. Our average loans were $1,000 for 10 to 12 months, so we needed about 15 months of seasoning, and we would say, okay, this guy paid off, or this guy charged off, and then we would look at the charge-offs, and you can really build your models based on that. So when I was, knew nothing about this, and I was trying to build my company, I would always ask all these experts in credit, so how many bads do I need to build a model? And they would all kind of, have different numbers, but what I kind of, coalesced around was you needed about 1,000 bads. So you got to basically make, and if you want to have at least a starting business where it's not like 80% losses, so let's say it's 10%, that means you have to make like 10,000 loans to get, 1,000 bads, right? So you got to figure out how to do that too. But that was a key lesson learned, was just book some bad loans. The third is really about alternative data. So, when we started, we were like 20, we had our like 300 attributes from the application and like 0 attributes from the bureau, and we would segment people into 25 different nodes. Let's say the first 10 nodes we would approve, and the next 15 we would decline. It was very basic. I thought I was pretty smart, went to Stanford and did this stuff and built my own little algorithm, but it was very rudimentary compared to what we did later. After that, fast forward several years later, we were pulling in over 2,500 different attributes from multiple different sources. We were buying data from companies that you've never heard of that would help us one way or another in the process. And then we were able to segment people into like over 120 segments where we just got more precise around how to score people. And so one thing I learned in that process was data and scoring is not just for approving and figuring out how you should approve and decline, but it also helps you to take out steps in your process. So let's say, for example, let's say with Maria, Maria might not have paycheck stubs, right? So, how am I going to prove her income? Or if she does, she might have thrown them away and she's got to wait for her next paycheck. If there's a database I can go find her on, and I feel like after a lot of testing, it can verify income, that can just take out because I could potentially give her a pre-approval on the spot, but then it takes 3 days for her to go locate these paycheck stubs if I want to prove her income, and I could just eliminate that step in the process, and that would actually have so much more value to me than even how I would use data to kind of rank order risk and segment. So, it's not only for scoring, your conversion rate in your application process is like really important. The last thing is, there's a lot of talk about alternative data, and it definitely helped us because we found a lot of power in merging bureau data with application data and non-traditional data, and that just created so much lift. But, right now, the challenging thing is that if you use a piece of data to decline somebody, in the US, there's this thing called Regulation B, the Fair Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And you have to list what your adverse action reasons are. So if any of you, I've been declined before, you get a letter and it says like these are the 2 reasons. So the jury's kind of out as to what data you can actually use if it's, let's say, Facebook data, for your actual decision to decline somebody. And so I think there's still going to be a lot of policy work around that. That said, we use data for maybe pricing, for credit line, how big of a loan to give somebody. You can use data for anti-fraud, as mentioned earlier. But the actual underwriting decision, jury's kind of still out, and there's some policy work that still needs to be developed there as to what you can actually use for a reason for declining somebody. So those are the lessons learned from Progresso. The result of that were lots of happy faces, and we actually lent to all of these people over 500,000 loans, and we did it with single-digit losses. So we're pretty proud of ourselves there. Now I've started a new company called InSeek, and we've tried to take this approach for the P2P market. And so what I want to do is just kind of walk through. This is a little bit more of a data-intensive, risk-intensive process, but I think it would be helpful to understand kind of what we go through. So data and analytics are really important to kind of both sides of our business. We're trying to partner with P2P companies and others to kind of figure out in the subprime market, how can we originate. So certainly we're building our own models, and so for every partner we kind of have our own model that we build. If we can use their data and as much as we can get it, that's important, but if we can pipe in other data like we used to use before, that's extremely valuable. So I'll walk through that. And then on the other side, we're also basically trying to create a more curated market for securitization investors to come in and get great access to data on, for example, if you buy a bond and there's 1,200 loans in that pool that are collateralizing that bond, how is every individual person of that 1,200 borrowers performing? You can see all their payments, all their information, and you can get better access to transparency than you can, or better access to information than you can in the traditional securitization market. So that's how we use data. So we've been partnering with Prosper. All of this is their public data, so except the blue line, which is ours. But so basically, we've got 100 years of experience, doing credit. Well, our goal was to just figure out, can we outperform, good times and bad times. I mean, Prosper they actually started off a little rocky, and they had some pretty high loss rates in the beginning days. In 2008, you can see that. If we had applied our models back then, the blue line is kind of where we would have been, and then more recently, in good times, we're still kind of trying to outperform. So that's what we've done in the P2P market, and then try to put that to work. So the way our process goes through, and I'll run through this quickly because it's a little more detail on the data side. So basically, building a risk model, most important is getting maximum data attributes, logistic regression to kind of build your sloping. It's also important how fast you can automate that. The second part is what are you valuing? To value what we would, we have a lot of ex-Cap 1 guys, and their approach was basically you value the NPV of every customer. So that means your marketing costs, your cost of funds, everything else, and not just the expected loss rate. So you're looking at your pricing, you're looking at your terms, and you're really trying to optimize NPV and ROE of every loan. And then the last thing, which I think is really important to do, is to stress test it. So if we actually were going to approve this borrower, but then we ran through 2008 loss rates, and you stress it, would you actually approve this borrower or not? Because if you then, if you have another situation of high unemployment, and credit card portfolios are very highly correlated with how unemployment goes historically. So if you get hit with those kind of losses, would this still be a profitable decision? So high level there, de-averaging key performance indicators is very important. You want to keep testing and learning, incorporating a lot of data, and you want to test you want to optimize as many things from credit line. You want to look at your pricing, marketing channels. We've kept this a little high level because also, it's hard, maybe as Renaud said, you can't pull out of your credit people a lot of information that you'd want to share. So this is just a high level kind of decision tree framework. There's really nothing in there, but effectively at the bottom are all the nodes that you can create, and each node is like a specific credit line, a specific expected loss rate. Some people are approved, and then those that are above your targeted loss rate are declined. There's this thing called the KS statistic in statistics, which measures the predictive power of your models. So, high level for us, we don't share this often, but basically, we've been building models alongside the Prosper core model and trying to have more predictive power for the loans that we're trying to re-underwrite and approve and select from their models. And so we've had a good lift, even if you look at different time periods of performance. So, 29% in 2011 loans versus their 22%. So when that rolls out, with respect to Prosper specifically, they have AA loans down to E. So the red line would be where their kind of projected and also more recently actual loss rates are, and the blue would be where ours would be, kind of in every segment, just to show you kind of a framework. So what those charts show, and it's important when you talk about season losses, are the x-axis is time on book. So if you book a loan, the bottom is how many months, so 29, 36 months of seasoning, and then of course the y-axis is your cumulative losses that accrue in that vintage. So this is very high level, but if you apply a valuation framework, you want to get deep into looking at everything from ROE, credit line. You want to look at all the different performance indicators. And then you want to stress test your assumptions. So again, back to the point of, what if I ran the 2008 economic downturn through this? How do the NPVs look? How do things perform? And then use that to keep reinforcing your models. So we've tried to use data at InSeek in a way, and using a lot of alternative data, to just be very good at segmenting risk, so more of a credit focus. And we've tried to do that more specifically applied to the non-prime segment, because we believe in the U.S. that segment is just really underserved for credit. And given our prior history, we were able to produce very low loss rates for a segment that otherwise people would assume would be like 30–40% loss rate. So lastly, just tools for investors. So in the world of securitization buyers, the complaint is like, hey, I bought this thing and it was rated, but I don't get to see how anything actually performs. I don't know what the underlying loss curves are of the associated loans. So we've tried to be innovative in how we show data for our investors. This is just a chart from our website. So we give access to folks who invest in our securitizations, and basically what we've done is we plotted all of the historical performance, of course, of ours and also Prosper's, so you can see all the vintage level loss curves, and you can compare and contrast, so everything's out there, transparent. Again, all this data is already public anyways. The challenge is not really digestible. So what we've thought of is this tool called My Chief Risk Officer, which is kind of like if you had your own stud kind of risk person that was working for you and helping you think of loans, what would they want to know, what information actually matters, and how to make that digestible. So we've done that through some interesting tools that are all dynamic online that investors could then kind of click through and say, okay, get it, I see how things are actually performing, I don't need to be worried, I can go back, stop spending so much time buying loans, or I can spend a lot more time really worrying about this stuff. So, so in this example, we've set a forecast line, which is the black line of what we expect losses to be over a period of 36 months. And then the blue line is what they actually have been, so that's been good. So I'll stop there, but that's how we've used data for InSeek in kind of the alternative credit space. I'd love to take any questions.
Terrific. Thanks, James. So